Hello, guys, and welcome to this first podcast on Philosophize Now. This is a working title. This is going to be a long series about Eastern as well as Western philosophy, in which we will primarily look at the chronology of philosophy and how the world of philosophy has developed for over thousands of years. We begin all the way back uh, to the pre-Socratic era. And I have with me my friend Khemka, Pramay Khemka. So we'll be doing this podcast together for many months and years to come. But we start
Hopefully.
often, yes. And yeah, so okay, I'll just let you say a few words before we actually get started on what we want to cover today.
Yeah, so maybe you can just talk about the idea, how this started. And Sid and I were just sitting and talking about a few things. And obviously, we both like to read. So, yeah, this was uh, an idea that we had been thinking about, and we just thought, let's try it out. So, uh, we'll start with Western philosophy, but this is not strictly going to be chronological, although it will be roughly chronological. And then when we come to Eastern philosophy, it might be pre Western philosophy as well, but
Right.
we'll just cover that a bit later. Just to, it's more related to the context and the chronology of ideas as compared to a strictly time based chronology.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I think that's a good
yeah,
distinction. Like, I think we will definitely meander a little bit
yeah,
with Eastern and Western philosophy, although I think it's a good point to start off by talking about the pre-Socratic philosophers. But we'll definitely also, at some point, I think we will make some distinction and go into the West, come over to this side of the aisle and talk about Eastern philosophy, Indian philosophy, as well as Chinese philosophy. And also I want to, like, for our viewers, I would like to say that, for us, this is also a journey of learning philosophy as well. And we are by no means experts, but we are definitely interested. So that is our starting point. And we hope to improve ourselves, in terms of our content as well as in terms of how we deliver that content, and hopefully also the technical aspects as well. So going forward, we hope to improve ourselves, and yeah, hopefully we can put together a good series for anybody who's interested in philosophy. So I think that's a good enough introduction. In this first
yeah.
video, we want to talk about the pre-Socratic philosophers, specifically in ancient Greece. And first of all, we want to start talking about philosophy in the context of why humans felt the need to philosophize in the first place. And the first thing that I want to touch upon is something called the out of Africa theory. As we all know, humans evolved over millions of years, and I think the starting point is somewhere in Africa. I don't know where exactly, but it began somewhere in Africa, and then humans progressed, they migrated further north, and then probably moved east and westwards at the same time, right?
Yep. That's the best understanding that we have as of now. But obviously, we
Yeah.
weren't there.
So I think when we essentially, this is the out of Africa theory, that if we
Yeah.
trace our DNA, or if we trace our sort of evolutionary journey, it all comes from Africa. I think a lot of people agree with that. There's not much controversy with respect to that. But obviously, I think this is now why is this important in the first place? I think this is important because even at that very early stage, on some level, this shows that humans had some spirit of, I don't know, maybe adventure, or maybe at that point it was just survival, who knows. But the fact that they moved northwards, perhaps reached somewhere in the area which is today known as probably modern day Israel, Palestine, or
Yep.
that fertile crescent maybe. So now it seems very normal, but if you imagine the journey thousands and thousands of years ago, at that time it was a journey into the unknown, and humans
Yep.
still undertook that journey. Maybe some of it was in search of better life or just resources, but they took
And
that journey.
Yeah, and this was a very slow process. I mean, when talking about time frames, we're talking about something like 2 million years ago to maybe 7,000 years ago. So at max 10,000 years ago. So this
Yeah.
is a journey of hundreds of thousands of years. It's not like Sid decided, or Sid's ancestor from Africa decided that, yeah, okay, I just want to go and check Asia out. It might just have been a natural progression that we started in sub-Saharan Africa, started migrating northwards because there's not much to explore in the south. Humanity did go south, uh, hit Cape of Good Hope, and realized, okay, there's nothing more to explore over here. We had not invented boats yet. We didn't know how to travel the seas, so we just traveled north. Uh, Afro Eurasia was connected through land, so it was easier to migrate from Africa to the Middle East. That was the biggest land connection.
Right.
And I think that's why this whole migration transmission happened. It was just, and as Sid mentioned, it uh, shows the spirit of exploration that was present in humanity. It wasn't you or I booking a flight to Russia and just trying to explore Russia. It was just a natural curiosity of knowing what's there outside my boundary.
Yeah.
Think of it as, for Lord of the Rings fans out there, think of it as when Sam Gamgee is at the edge of the Shire and he says, "One more step, and this will be the furthest I've ever been from home." So
Yeah.
humans doing that over whatever uh, thousands, hundreds of thousands of years led us to basically colonize other parts of the world, Africa, Eurasia for now.
Yeah. And also, I think there must have been an element of survival as well, especially in those
Yep.
really early times. I think 10,000, although we don't really know exactly about these dates with any kind of precision, but I think, if we say 10,000 years ago, if we take that as some kind of a generic milestone, I think that's probably when survival was somewhat taken care of. Not exactly like, humans perhaps were not thriving the way they are thriving today, but maybe, there was some degree of protection from predators and some forms of at least primitive civilizations. Like, we know the
Yep.
civilizations, that the earliest civilizations that we know about through archaeological evidence, and that kind of through archaeological evidence, that's probably those kind of civilizations probably came up in modern day Iraq or Mesopotamia and Indus Valley. But I think even before that, there must have been some primitive notions of civilizations, or
Yep.
yeah. So some concepts of maybe villages or rituals. So I think at that point, I think that is a point where, humans had a little bit of extra time at their hand, which is when
Exactly.
they
Yep.
started asking some of these difficult questions, or some of these difficult but also, really exciting questions. And that's where the origin of philosophy lies, in our opinion, actually.
Yep. To trivialize this, 10,000 years ago is also roughly uh, the beginning of the agricultural revolution, as uh, people or scientists consider it.
Ex-
So, to completely trivialize this, you can think about, okay, my food is taken care of. I'm not getting attacked by animals because I'm living in a group of 150 odd people. So I am secure. My food is taken care of. What else do I have to do? Okay, let me sit and think about where I came from, of
yeah.
what I am, and think about the nature of things. So that's s- probably the beginning of philosophy as far as we understand it. But uh, this is just a theory.
But on a slightly, taking a slight detour, I just remembered one. I was having a conversation with a friend, because as humans tend to believe that, humanity is the pinnacle of evolution, right? Humans believe that, we are the most evolved of all creatures. But like, if you look at it, there are a couple of other ways of looking at it, right? When we see when Kemka, when you talked about agriculture, and if you think of some basic crops, basically, crops like rice and wheat, these are
Hmm.
crops that are grown all over the world. So some
Yep.
people might argue that these plants like rice
Yep.
and wheat, perhaps they are the most evolved creatures, or they are the most evolved species of all. Because think what they have managed to achieve. they have managed to convince humans that they are so important for human survival that humans have essentially gone towards all extremes of the earth and they are cultivating these plants. So now
Yep.
they
And
don't have to do anything. They don't have to do anything.
yep. And this theory of either plants or cattle, I mean, just to extrapolate that argument, plants being the most successful species in in the history of of the earth, or cattle being the most successful species in the history of uh, the world. I think they're very logical. It makes sense, and uh, I completely agree. I mean,
Even if you even if
we
you
grew. Yeah.
even if you look at the plants, right? Even if you look at plants or trees in general, humans, we need so many things for our survival, especially not just in modern times, because now we need really a lot of things for our survival. But even, even thousands of years ago, humans still needed a lot for their survival, actually. But if you look at plants, they are completely, all they need is, they don't even need movement for their survival. They are anchored in one place. All they need is, the sun, some amount of sunlight, which is enough for them to turn that into energy. On the other, or if you look at humans, they require a lot of things from the outside world. So maybe that is one way of looking at evolution and deciding what is the pinnacle of evolution. It's not a foregone conclusion that humans are the pinnacle of evolution, but I want to bring us back onto the subject here, right? So I think this is a good point to take a turn and actually start talking about the pre-Socratic era of philosophy. So Socrates, I think I would say that Pranay, we would probably be spending at least one or two episodes dedicated to Socrates, because
Yep.
he is the sort of the zero mile, I would say, of Western philosophy, at least. But yeah,
Yep.
but there have been many philosophers, especially in Greece and perhaps in the area that is modern day Italy, or maybe not just Greece, but Greece and Turkey, that area, and also Italy. There had been many philosophers in that area before Socrates. So in this first podcast, I think we would like to spend some time talking about at least a few of them. So let me set this up, right. So I was doing a little bit of research, and perhaps the most important or the most well-known school of philosophy from that era is the Milesian school of philosophy. And this was the school of pre-Socratic philosophy all the way back in perhaps 6th century BC, based out of a town known as Miletus. I hope I'm saying that correctly, but it's Miletus. And yeah, so this is the sort of cradle of ancient Greek and Western philosophy. We'll be specifically talking about one guy who is the first philosopher, as is he's considered to be the first philosopher from those times. His name is Thales, or Thales. How do you say this?
Uh, Thales.
Thales. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So let's spend a few minutes on this guy.
Yep. So um, basically, so this is he's the first philosopher as we know him today, but he's not necessarily the first guy who sat down and started thinking. So unfortunately, those civilizations did not write things down. We don't know what they were thinking. There were certainly people thinking about the nature of people, nature of everything. And uh, if you just break philosophy down, it is lover of knowledge. It's philo, which is love, and uh, ophi, which is basically knowledge. So lover of knowledge or lover of wisdom. So anyone who's sitting down and thinking was basically a philosopher. Uh, Coming back to Thales, uh, the reason I think we know about him a bit more is that people started writing things down at this time, and people had books out, and there were buyers for those books. So some of those works survived, and which is why we started understanding them. But it also gives us a view into how they were thinking at the time. So if you look at uh, what Thales was thinking, his main idea, it wasn't really philosophy as we think about it today. It is probably more metaphysics. As I was talking about he was thinking about the nature of things. That
The nature of reality, yes.
yes, nature of reality. What is what? Who am I? What am I? What am I made of? What are you made of? What is everything made of? That was the question that he was asking himself. And this guy was a super smart guy. I mean, he was extremely rich. Uh, was a hustler and entrepreneur uh, by today's definition and today's words. But because he had that comfort, that luxury of not having to basically work day to day and use his mind to earn money or be rich or be respected, he could also think about these things that, okay, what is everything made of? And his big idea was that everything is made of water.
Exactly. His big idea was everything is made up of water, and extrapolating that, his big idea was that everything is made up of one thing. There's one thing which sort of pervades the entire existence, and everything is made up of that one thing. And water, as Pramay mentioned, right? In today's day and age, it might not seem very logical, but if you can somehow, cast your mind all the way back to 6th century BC, it's not all that illogical, because the way he saw it, he saw the oceans, and there's endless water. He saw that water can literally take any shape, especially in the liquid form. He saw that, water, if you heat it, it evaporates and turns into steam. So from his perspective, water was at the center, water was at the core of everything. And even though, when we think about it today, it doesn't make a lot of sense because of what we know, whatever we've discovered, and the knowledge that we've gained in the last thousands of years, let's say. But from his perspective, the fact that he, this idea of monism, where, everything has one fundamental underlying reality, I think that was a huge step. And as Pramay said, I think even beyond his core idea, the fact that, this guy, as it was mentioned before, this guy was extremely affluent. He was from a very privileged society. He from a very privileged background, rather. He was extremely affluent. Like, there are some records which suggest he was extremely good looking as well. So he had everything going for him. And this is perhaps the biggest credit to him, that, despite being from such a background, he actually, had that spirit of questioning things. And it's only when you question that, you even try to come up with ideas. I think, Pramay, you mentioned that he was also an entrepreneur, and at that stage he already had a lot of wealth. I mean, he was well traveled, he had a lot of wealth, he could literally do anything that he wanted. And yet there are some records which suggest that, he had this tremendous entrepreneurial spirit, and he would make money whenever he wanted to. So he kind of proved at that very early stage, thousands of years ago, that, if you want, you can make money. And he's, people say that he's the first philosopher, but in some ways, he's also one of the first entrepreneurs. So yeah,
The,
this guy was something special. I think at this stage we have to point out that, when we talk about pre-Socratic philosophers, or even Socrates himself, or even when we talk about Plato and Aristotle later, it's not so much that, you have to believe in everything that they said, but it's just interesting to see how their mind worked at that stage, given they didn't know what we know today. And we are, when we talk
yeah,
about philosophy or reality today, we are building upon the work, and the work of, people from thousands and thousands of years. They didn't have that luxury. So with that said, I think, yeah, it's very interesting
yeah,
what this guy did. Interesting guy.
yep. I mean, yeah. I mean, uh, don't think of him as the first philosopher. And actually, coming back to the entire podcast, uh, just think of it as the evolution of thought. Like, a lot of us would have studied evolution of humanity. We would have studied how we are descended from the great apes, and we're part of the great apes family, and uh, all the steps that came into that evolution. Think of this as a, a part of that entire story. So once we reached humanity as we know it, the human form as we understand it. Then another journey started, which was the evolution of thought. And uh, Thales was basically he saw water around him, and he he called it water. But think of it, maybe a better way to think of it today might be to accept it today might be think of it as liquids. So he saw water all around him. That was the most prevalent liquid. If you boiled it, as Sid said, if you boiled it, it evaporated. If you if it was cold at night, it froze. So it was something that exhibited all three states of matter very easily. Or I'm not talking about plasma, but yeah, all the three commonly known states of matter very easily. When somebody got cut, blood poured out. So human body was made of liquids. Yes, there were solid components to it, but they might just be cold liquids. Maybe that's what he was thinking. Uh, by by the time we've come to Thales, they already had metal working. So bronze was made by melting things. So again, it might be solid and it might be used for armor and weapons and all of that. But at the end of the day, if you apply heat to it, it melts. It's just a kind of cold water. I think that's where that thought process started. That the underlying thing everywhere is water, and then you just mix things to water. You mold water into different things, and that's how the entire world, the entire universe is created.
Exactly.
Uh,
And he saw oceans all around him. He
yeah,
perhaps felt that, land is nothing but, something floating on top of water. And
yep.
exactly. So, by the way, at this point, we mentioned that, he belongs to the Milesian school of philosophy. Milesian school of philosophy is nothing but, just based out of this town called Miletius. And just to add one more distinction here, this whole area, Greece and in this age we have Greece, and then neighboring Greece we have Turkey. But I think in those times, obviously the concept of nations and countries as they exist today did not. So this whole area was known as Ionia rather. So
Yeah.
this guy Thales is considered a Ionian philosopher based out of this town known as Miletius. Anyways, once Thales passed away, his tradition was promptly carried forward by two other great thinkers of that time. One of them was Anaximander, the other one was Anaximenes. Now, Anaximander had some pretty crazy ideas, but once again, he had a very primitive primitive version of the theory of universe, and more importantly, he questioned something very fundamental. He looked at human babies and he saw that human babies till the age of 2 or 3, perhaps even more than that, cannot take care of themselves at all. Unlike some other animals, where they reach some degree of maturity fairly quickly, human babies are not. They cannot take care of themselves at all. So he questioned, that the first human baby, how did he survive? And for that, he had a pretty crazy idea that babies first sort of manifested themselves in the bellies of fish. And people look at those ideas today and somehow think that he probably had some notions of evolution all the way back in those times. I don't think that is the case. I don't think his ideas make much sense, but I think certainly, once again, the fact that he questioned that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. At the time, they were the two main questions that they were trying to answer is what is everything and what am I? So go back to Thales. He was answering what is everything. He said everything is water. Effectively, that's his argument. He had logic behind it. That's fine, and that was all observational evidence. Come to Anaximander. His main question was what am I? And then he saw babies all around him, and he saw that they needed to be protected. They needed to be taken care of. And his logic was uh, he called it bellies of fish, and that was his argument. But if you and I start thinking about it today, start thinking about this from scratch without the knowledge of evolution, without the knowledge of 2,500 years of exploration around this topic, then maybe you and I will also think that, yeah, okay, when babies are born, they're in a cocoon. Now, today we know that that cocoon is society. But at that point, you might have thought it was actually a physical cocoon. And Anaximander said that, okay, that cocoon was the belly of a fish. And while we grew in there, we reached, uh, basically, we grew to a certain size till we could be self dependent. And then we cut the belly of the fish open and we came out. So, interesting idea. Uh, I would say don't think about it as a actual fish that he was thinking about. Think of it as a cocoon. We were protected. We were protected from predators. We were cared for in that cocoon. And connecting back to today, that cocoon, the it was a physical cocoon that he considered, but today just think of it uh, as the cocoon of society that we grow up in.
Exactly.
And yeah.
Anaximenes was, I think he came further down the line. I
Yeah, I
unfortunately
think he was an Anaximander student.
he was a student of Anaximander. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So I think he built on these theories a bit. And again, when we are talking about Western philosophy in particular, Western philosophy is organized around schools of thoughts. So it's not really one person that dominates the entire philosophy. Although, yeah, we've been talking about Socrates and pre-Socratic philosophy. So, but Socrates is not the Jesus figure of philosophy. He is not the first person who started doing it. Pre-Socratic is just a term used because Socrates was so influential, and he is influential even today in how we think about things. But these were all thinking about things, and they had schools of thoughts. So uh, the Milesian school of thought, which Sid talked about, it started with Thales, and all of these people, so Anaximander, Anaximenes, they all built on top of them. So uh, it's difficult to attribute thoughts to a certain individual because it just came out of all these schools of thoughts. So Anaximander and Anaximenes, teacher-student relationship, but a lot of the views are attributed to both of them. Think of it that way.
And I think that's a fair point to make, because not just in Western philosophy, but even in Chinese philosophy, especially in Indian philosophy as well. Philosophy has a way of having this evolving through this teacher-student relationship. In Indian philosophy, as we'll see in later podcasts, it's exactly the same. People write commentaries on ancient Indian texts, and then thousands of years down the line, somebody will come and write a commentary on a commentary. And that's sort of how one school of Indian philosophy evolves. And then you have several schools of philosophies, which sometimes they progressed and evolved in parallel, often at complete conflict with one another. And it's something very similar we'll see in Western philosophy as well, once we read Socrates and move further on from those times. Now, after Anaximander and Anaximenes, the next guy who had a big role to play was Heraclitus. And this guy was a character. This guy was an absolute character in those times, because he was an angry guy. He was extremely bad tempered and ill tempered, and he was kind of a loner actually. He liked to sit by himself and think, and he did not like to be. He never liked to be interrupted, and he was definitely not a social guy. He even didn't write much, in fact, and he did some crazy things in his life. I mean, one interaction that he had, because at that time in ancient Greece, he was gaining some popularity because of his thoughts, or even though he was never sort of open to questioning, or he was never really he was not a people person in general, so he would not sit and teach people. He was not a teacher at all, by the way. And he didn't even like to share his ideas. But at
Uh,
some point, I think a lot of people did get together and request him to write something, so that his legacy is preserved. And I think one interaction that he had, I think he got a letter from King Darius of Persia, who I believe at that time was a fairly powerful guy. And all the King Darius of Persia, all he wanted to do was congratulate Heraclitus on his latest book, which was on philosophy. I think it was a book on natural philosophy that he had released at that point. And he invited Heraclitus to come and visit Persia. And at that stage, the response from Heraclitus was astonishing, because he showed no respect to this extremely powerful man. And yeah, this kind of so essentially he just said that, I would not be interested in visiting Persia at all. And that was the essence of his message to King Darius of Persia, who was a very powerful man at that time. He also has some really, by the way, before a crazy story about what he did when he was very old and afflicted with some injuries or with some diseases. Before that, I think it would be good to talk about some of his key ideas. So I'll just mention it, and Prema, you can build on that. I think one of his key
I
ideas
mean,
was,
before that, just to give you an idea of why Sid is calling him what sullen, angry, loner. Uh, this guy was so. Think of that smartass who hates everyone and everything. You might remember someone from school, from college, from your office, from your personal life. It might be anyone, but just I'm sure you've come across that one person who's very smart, but he's just angry all the time. He hates everything. He doesn't care about anything. He just says, "Let me be alone and let me do my own thing." Now, and the story of King Darius that he was mentioning. So Darius is basically off the line of Xerxes for people who have seen 300. So Xerxes' father was Darius the second. His father, I think, was Darius the first. And yeah, Greece and Persia are not on friendly terms. The Greek city-states, Ionia and the entire peninsula was not on friendly terms with Persia. But still, Darius was considered to be one of the most powerful people in the known world at that time. And all Darius said was, "Come over, talk to me. I would love to hear your thoughts." He was being very nice. He actually complimented this guy a lot.
and
This guy,
King Darius, by the way, somehow managed to procure one of his books. He read that
yep,
book, and all he
yep,
wanted to do was discuss, and he had some questions.
yep. And this guy wrote back with, so, I mean, I don't have the text of the letter with me, but he was effectively saying, "Dude, you suck. Persia sucks. I'm not going to come. I'm not going to travel all the way to Persia just to talk to you. So I know people kowtow to you and people basically run after you and you're the big thing, but I don't care and just stop disturbing me." So this is the kind of guy. I mean, super smart, but completely antisocial and uh, quite full of himself, to be very honest.
Yeah.
Now, having uh, spoiled his reputation enough, more than enough, I think we can talk about his ideas.
Some of his core
And
ideas, yes.
yeah, and this is where you actually start thinking about philosophy. Philosophy. It's no longer uh, metaphysics. It's no longer thinking about the origin of things. It's about thinking about things as they are. Uh, One of the arguments that he made was, if you step into a river, uh, do you ever step into the same river twice? Now, if you have ever stepped into a river, what's your answer? Just think about that. Yes, you might have stepped into the Thames or the or the Volga or the Ganga. But the argument he was trying to make was that once you step in, the water is flowing. So the particles of water or the water that your feet touch the first time you step in will never be the same as the particles that your feet touch the next time you step into it. So is it the same river? When everything that you're touching, your feet are touching something entirely different. Is it the same river or is it a completely different river? That was the question he asked. And I consider this to be one of the first actual philosophic thoughts. Uh, but Yeah, would love to hear your thought around that, Sid.
No, I think I completely agree with you, because that distinction is very important. Before him, everybody was questioning the origin of things. This guy is, as you mentioned, right? He's questioning why things are the way they are, or I would say he is questioning how do we know what we know. He's kind of moving in that direction a little more.
Yep.
So for that precise reason, I think this guy deserves a lot of credit, because this is not a just this thought experiment that, if you step into a river twice, or forget about stepping into a river, even if you just slightly dip your toes in any river, or actually any body of water, uh, is it the same body of water? It's a very interesting question, because it is a very interesting question because in his mind he must have started thinking about what the river is made up of, right? Because only
Yeah.
then you will have these notions that, okay, it's not the same river at all, because probably he didn't have any notion or ideas of molecules or atoms, because that comes later, that comes with the next guy,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But he definitely felt that it is made up of something which the sum of parts that makes up a river. So every time you dip your toes into a body of water, you lift it back up, and once you put it back in, maybe something changes in the constitution of that body of water. So then, can you say that it is made up of the same thing that it was before? And this is very important, right? Because this leads you to a lot of other such questions. Our own bodies, right? Our own, like, now we know that maybe every 10 years or so, I think maybe 10, I could be wrong about the number, but I think every 10 years or so, your skin cells regenerate, or things like that, right? So then, do you have the same body that you were born with? It's a question very similar to the question that this guy asked all those years back. So this is like later philosophers, some philosophers would agree with him or build upon his theories. I think some other philosophers, I think including Plato, maybe completely, discredited this guy. But yeah, this flux theory was extremely important.
Yeah,
Extremely.
and they discredited him because they all hated him because for lack of a better term, he was an asshole. So,
He was an asshole, yeah.
uh, uh, yeah, but just think about it that way. So think about any I think the most famous philosophical paradox, the ship of Theseus paradox, and we'll come to it in later
We'll come to,
episodes.
yes.
Uh, but effectively, the idea is that if you change all the panels of a ship, is the ship the same thing, or uh, is it a completely new ship? I think this guy is the origin of that line of thinking. That
Exactly.
introducing paradoxes, but uh, there may be different answers for different people. Even if I give you the river argument, I gave you the argument of yes, the water molecules have moved, and I'm stepping my foot into a new river every single time. But you, as a third party observer, might just say that no, I am standing here, sitting, whatever, 50 feet away, and I see you stepping into the exact same river every single time. If I take a photo of you, every time you step into the river, it's exactly the same thing. The flow rate is exactly the same. The path of the river is exactly the same. The size of your foot is exactly the same. So it is exactly the same thing. So this guy introduced the idea of not having that one right answer, of thinking in paradoxes. And they call it the flux theory. But uh, the underlying concept is start thinking about things, and uh, what you see may not necessarily be what is real or what you understand. So that's why I think this guy is very important. And uh, I think among the pre-Socratics, uh, I respect him the most for his school of thought. Yeah.
Now that respect is definitely something which comes from some of these ideas that he had, the flux theory, and it's not just about the name, but what he gave us. But having said that, as we mentioned, he was an angry, sullen guy. He was a loner. He disrespected people, and he kind of had a very sad end. sad and kind of funny, I would say. But it was his ego which led to the way he died, actually. And it's a pretty funny story. But I think he had some sort of a disease, maybe edema, maybe pulmonary edema, or but essentially there was an accumulation of water in his body, and instead of actually going to see a doctor in those times, because of his ego, he did go and meet with some sort of a medical professional at that time. But of course, his ego being as big as it was, he would not listen to anybody else, because he always believed that he was right and nobody else was. So his solution was to immerse him neck deep in cow manure, and just stay there for a while in the sun. And the idea being the idea being that the heat of the sun would ultimately heat up the cow manure, which would somehow extract the water from his body. It's needless to say that this experiment did not work, and he died as sad a death as one can imagine. I don't think a lot of people in that town had a problem with this, because he had managed to piss pretty much everybody off. But it's very interesting, because he did what he believed in, and yeah, even when he was staring at death, even at that time he was not willing to make any accommodations for anybody else's ideas, even when it related to his own health, his own life at the end. This was Heraclitus, in a nutshell. A great man, but also a tremendously angry man. He kind of divides opinion in the pre-Socratic philosophy world. He tremendously divides opinion, but I think from our perspective, it's his key ideas that he left us with. I think, and that spirit of questioning how things are in the moment. I think that is the key takeaway uh, for this guy. Now, should we move on
Uh,
to the next one? Should we move on to the last one, or anything to add, Kimka, on this
uh,
tremendous
the
guy?
one thing I'd add is that this spirit of dualism, flux, paradoxical thinking, this sort of did not continue beyond Heraclitus because he didn't have a lot of followers. So basically, cocksure guy, very confident of himself, hates humanity, hates civilization, hates everyone around him. Obviously, he didn't have a lot of followers.
Yeah, and he also
So
apparently hated writing. That
yeah,
was another thing.
hated writing, hated sharing, hated everything. But great thoughts. I think had he been a bit more sociable, uh, he yeah, we could have been calling this pre-Heraclitic and post-Heraclitic philosophy. So, but anyway, moving on to Democritus.
But just before that, it's interesting to think about this guy, because because from the perspective of an outsider, even when we look at his life, and we are barely scratching the surface here, but even when we look at his life, it seems a bit sad as to the way he lived his life. But I can't imagine him being sad. From his perspective, I think, he did what he felt was right. So yeah, there's flux in there as well. Anyways, I want to move on to the last guy. I want to move on to the last guy, because let's remember, this is our first podcast. So I want to keep it short and see how this goes, and then we'll probably try to make some improvements in the future. Last guy, take it away, Democritus.
So Democritus again goes back to because, as I said, Heraclitus thought about something other than origins of things. He thought about things as they are. Democritus went back. He thought about uh, what's everything made of. The idea that he had is something that you and I are very, very, very familiar with. His idea was that the universe is made up of atoms. And I'm using, don't think of atoms as in the particles that we understand and know and have named. think of atoms as the term itself. It literally means unbreakable. I'm sure you've studied that when you studied sixth grade physics. The atom was the fundamental particle, and his theory was that the entire universe, everything, is made of fundamental particles and empty space, which he called the void. So there were atoms and the void. More atoms, more things, void, nothing. It's when I look back at him, I think it's so true and correct, and uh, it's amazing that this guy 2,500 years ago stumbled upon something that it has taken science 2,000 years to explain and understand. And even today, if you look at it, yes, we have broken the atom down into quarks and we understand quarks better. But if you look at the fundamental particle of everything, we still have no idea. Maybe quarks can be broken down further, because 100 years ago, molecules were the biggest, were the smallest possible things. Molecules were the atoms, then atoms were the atoms. Today, quarks are the atom equivalents. There might be something even more fundamental. But the idea that everything is made up of fundamental particles was something that was way ahead of his time. It is honestly, it is way ahead of our time as well. Even today, we do not know what that fundamental particle is after 2,000 years and trillions or quadrillions or zillions of dollars and time spent into understanding that one piece. So I think that was his core idea, but he did have a lot of other ideas as well. So, Sid, you want to?
Yeah, I think this core idea was very interesting, and I think, as you pointed out, he kind of because if you look at Thales' idea, he also believed that everything is made up of water. Obviously, again, his idea was not very similar to Democritus, because Democritus kind of fundamentally, he believed in the existence of a fundamental particle as opposed to one sort of continuous reality, which is water. But in one way, I think it was a progression of that idea, because he was trying to explain what everything is made up of. I think this is very, very interesting, because even today, this is the search that science is after. What is that one fundamental particle that makes up everything? And in a sort of reductionist way, we keep on breaking things down, and we will continue to do so, until we find that one thing which we cannot further break. So with that said, I think this guy was definitely some he I think, of all the people that we've discussed today, I think everybody is unique in their own ways, right? But I think this guy, it's fair to say, had a very special intellect, or just very special and a different way of looking at things, and also asking the kind of questions that not many people before him had asked.
Yeah,
He was
I mean,
also Yeah,
I
go
mean,
on.
yeah, Democritus might be the first person who was sitting with his friends in a circle and said, "Bro, we're all stardust," because that's actually how he came up with his idea.
Yeah,
Uh, he was uh, he was seeing a beam of light and he saw dust particles suspended in that beam of light, and he just sat there and started thinking that, okay, maybe that's what I am made of. And I mean, it is metaphysics, but if you think at it, that's true. Uh, I mean, dust uh, dust is literally you. You go into any scientific journal and you'll see dust is what, 80% human cells.
exactly.
I mean, maybe not in India where we live, but generally speaking, dust is 80% dead human cells. But the fact that he thought about that was so revolutionary that it contradicted everything else that was around at the time. I think at the time, and Sid, correct me if I'm wrong, I think at the time, the Greeks or the Proto Greeks had ideas similar to uh, Indian philosophy and Indian views on uh, the soul and life and afterlife, and the concept of being bound to the body. And we'll talk more about this when Pythagoras comes in.
Yeah.
But they had Proto-Greeks had similar thoughts and ideas that uh, that there is a thing called a soul, and there's thing called life, and there's thing called afterlife, and uh, uh,
Yeah, that is.
very 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 similar ideas to the church, to the Christian church. Obviously, the
I think the best way to sum that up would be that, at that time, I think Greeks also believed, just like Indians and perhaps even Chinese to some extent, that apart from matter, something else exists as well, which is
yeah
responsible for the creation of everything else, for the creation of this entire universe and life as we know it. And when we talk about that something else, whatever you call it, soul, life, God, consciousness, whatever you call it, but then there is a sense of escapism in that stream of thinking, because then you can say that, okay, we don't know how everything came into existence, but it did somehow. There's some divinity or some sort of element of magic. But this guy came in and he's like, no, there is something fundamental which exists, which comprises everything, which makes up everything that we see. And it is something that can be grasped, it is something that can be realized. So supremacy of matter, somehow you could say. And this is kind of the basis for the way science is done even today, or the way particle physics is done even today.
yeah
Although this did cause him a lot of trouble, because it's important to point out that unlike the last guy who was a angry guy and sullen guy, unlike Heraclitus, this guy was he was well read, well educated. He wrote a lot, and apparently he traveled a lot. I think he, even in those early times, he managed to make his way all the way to Egypt. And in general, he was an avid traveler. So he was not a guy who was unapproachable or anything like that. And but his ideas were quite revolutionary, right? So I think later on, I think there are people who've sort of looked up to this guy, and people who've tried to take his legacy forward. Later we will see, and we will see in later episodes, when the church became prominent, especially in Europe, his ideas were really, really, really not acceptable in those times. It was not an acceptable thing to say that there is no afterlife, and it was not acceptable to say. I mean, it was not even acceptable to use the word atom. Actually,
yep
the church was around. So this guy and his teachings and his sort of way of thinking was perhaps, that way of thinking was, definitely brought to a abrupt halt by the church. But again, there was a revival, and science came along and revived it. I think even before science came along, there was a revival of his ideas.
uh, I mean, science was already thinking along these lines because, see, we have a lot of written knowledge about Greeks, and on this podcast, particularly, we are talking about the philosophical side of things. But at this exact same time, there were people looking up into the sky and calling things planetes or wanderers. So
Mhm.
they were naming planets at exactly the same time as Democritus was sitting there and saying that we are all stardust, or we are all dust. We are all made up of atoms and empty space. So it's funny, and it's a little non-intuitive for someone who's hearing it for the first time. But science and philosophy were progressing hand in hand, even at this time, even 2,500 years ago. Because
Yeah. That's why,
yeah,
even if we go all the way back to the first philosopher that we spoke about today, and Thales, even about him, it's very well known that he was, even he, because as we've already mentioned, he was very affluent, so he didn't really have any trouble when it came to, traveling around and visiting places and talking to people. And it is said that at that time, when he was doing so many things, and when he was, when he had already begun philosophizing and, coming with theories like everything is made up of water, at the same time, he went to different places and studied astronomy and geometry and things like that. So, in that age, especially in Greece and in this sort of Ionian peninsula, different things were progressing pretty much at the same time, as Pramay, you mentioned. Of course, one of them was cosmology, one of them was astronomy, one of them was just general geometry, and some notions of mathematics. And of
yep.
course, the last thing was philosophy as well.
And the thing that connects all of these things is, even if you look at everything from uh, the Bronze Age till pre-modern times, till the Industrial Revolution, it was only the affluent people who were able to afford to do all of this. All scientists were rich people. Newton was a rich guy. Uh, Galileo was fairly affluent. All the scientists that most of the scientists that you've heard of, Leonardo da Vinci was sponsored by the doges and uh, the leaders of Italy. So uh, thinking was an expensive hobby, and you could only do it if you were rich. So philosophy, science, mathematics, all of these, astronomy, cosmology, everything was basically just a domain of the rich. And we will come down to some people who are not rich and still manage to uh, get involved in these things. But uh,
Yeah, I think at
that's a,
this, I think, the philosophers that we have covered today and the ones that we will cover in the next podcast, primarily I think we will be spending a lot of time on Pythagoras, because he was a very very interesting guy, in and by himself. But I think it's only when we move to Socrates, when Socrates was that guy who was definitely not affluent. In fact, he was not at all. He actually had very little, and he was the guy who would literally speak with anybody he could find on the street, and would all he wanted to do was talk philosophy. So he was one of those people who brought philosophy to the masses. But that's a topic for the next podcast. I think I would like to stop here. I hope that this was a good discussion. Any thoughts, Kemka, how this went?
I mean, I think it went well. Would love for people to correct us, because honestly, we are learning as well. And if you know some things that we missed or we got wrong, it would be great for us to understand it better and learn together. I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the
Yeah.
goal. That's the goal. And next episode, we will be talking about Pythagoras. We will see, maybe we will begin talking about Socrates as well. But let's see how that goes. There's a lot of distance, there's a lot of ground to cover when it comes to philosophy. Philosophy is a work in progress, by the way. It's not just about Socrates and pre-Socratic and post-Socratic philosophers from thousands of years ago. I mean, there are exceptional philosophers in modern day times, and hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully very very soon. Well, I don't think very soon, because it's a long journey, but someday we will reach modern contemporary philosophers as well. And with this, I want to close this podcast. I wish I had something cool, interesting, and witty to say, but I don't. So we will
I mean,
come up with something.
I mean, it's not witty, but I think the one thing I'd encourage is uh, think, just think.
Yeah.
That's what philosophy is. Think about things. Think.
Yes.
I have a glass in front of me. Think about how that glass came to being, or what that glass means to you, or what that uh, glass can be. So
Or just look at
it's
or just tilt your head upwards at night if you are fortunate
yep.
enough to have clear sky, and think about things that you see. I think that is very very interesting, because at this time when all these philosophers were doing their things, a lot of people had their heads perhaps permanently tilted up during those summer months in ancient Greece, and they were making a lot of they were coming with a lot of theories, interesting theories, accurate theories also in some cases about the cosmos. So
Yeah.
with that, let's wrap this up. And I hope it was an interesting podcast. And we hope to see you guys again in another podcast very soon.